Good evening. This is Geography Lecture number 3 on Poland and the Baltic States. So again, if you have a map of Europe, if I can quickly grab some map of Europe in this textbook. I don't know that I'll successfully be able to show it to you, but I will try. If you consult a map of Europe, there we go. I'm going to try to screen this for you. Let's see. All right. Hopefully that's on your screen. Here is Poland, and here are the Baltic States. So this is the Atlantic Ocean, the North Sea. This is the Baltic Sea. It borders parts of Germany, Poland, and the Baltic States, as well as Sweden and Finland and Denmark. So this is the Baltic Sea. These three countries here are the Baltic States. That little nip right there is part of Russia, but it's not physically connected to the rest of Russia. We'll talk about that some in this lecture. And this is the nation of Poland today, its capital of Warsaw. All right, so turning this back around, I hope that was visible to you guys on your end. Who knows, maybe it was mirror imaged in some way and therefore totally nonsensical. I don't know. But in the map of Europe, if you look at it, you'll see that Poland is essentially a square country. That's not the shape Poland mostly had throughout its history. In fact, that's just since 1945. Poland got its present shape, its present constitution geographically, only at the end of World War II, when Joseph Stalin shifted the country of Poland a couple of hundred miles to the west. In fact, lands that are now part of Belarus and part of Romania, I think, used to be part of Poland back before 1945. But Stalin wanted to expand the Soviet Union to the west, so he simply took a couple of hundred miles of Poland and annexed it to the Soviet Union in 1945. And then he took a big chunk of eastern Germany and gave it to his newly remade Poland. Millions of Germans had to flee from what's now Poland out of their ancestral homelands, and millions of Poles moved to get out of the Soviet Union into the new borders of Poland. So there was a huge disruption of the Polish and the German peoples because of this. Warsaw was the capital of Poland before, and Warsaw is still the capital today, but Warsaw used to be sort of on the center to western side of Poland. Now it's in eastern Poland because the whole country got shifted to the west. All right. But be that as it may, the Polish people are a Slavic people. Their language family of Polish is Slavic, which it shares with Russian, Bulgarian, and Czech and Slovak. So these are the Slavic languages. Serbo-Croatian, spoken in the Baltic state, Balkans today. So Poles are Slavs. The overwhelming majority of Polish people are Roman Catholic. They are in Central Europe, although people of my generation might think of Poland as being in Eastern Europe because of the Cold War. We tended to divide Europe east and west based on whether it was part of the pro-American NATO bloc or pro-Soviet Warsaw Pact bloc, and obviously Poland was a communist country from 1945 to 1990, and it was allied to the Soviet Union. So to people of my age, we think of it as an Eastern European state, but it's really Central Europe. Geographically, it has an awful lot in common with Germany and the Czech Republic and Slovakia. It's part of the Central Europe. It is mostly plains. There are no great mountain ranges actually inside Poland. You start getting the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains in the very south, but it's plains and rolling hills. It was forested, but it's a very long time. It has been a great agricultural country. The portions the Germans used to control of what's now Poland, they had Slavic serfs under German lords, farming on vast estates. So it is very much an agricultural country. Today it is part of the European Union, and Polish people travel freely all over Europe and settle freely all over Europe. That's part of the EU. So there are lots of Polish immigrants all over Europe. There have been a lot of Polish immigrants to the United States since the 1890s. From the 1890s to around 1914, there was an enormous amount of Polish immigration to the United States, and a fair amount in more recent decades. So it could be some of you hearing this lecture are of partial or entirely Polish descent. I don't know. But a great many Polish Americans are around today. As I said, Poland was a communist country until 1990. It is a democracy, a parliamentary democracy today. And as a result, they, as almost all parliamentary democracies do, they usually have to form coalition governments. Although recently, a right-wing government, a very, very conservative government, right-wing populist government, has been elected. And they have been taking steps that other polls find are moving in the direction of authoritarianism. I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't know. But there have been claims that they're getting rid of judges they don't like to replace them with sort of hardliners. The ruling party today has a very strong anti-immigration stance and so on, as you have found in other parts of Central Europe in the last few years. So the politics of Poland have come a long way from the communism of less than 30 years ago to now a very conservative right-wing populist government, but rather authoritarian, at least by reputation. I don't know a great deal about Polish politics, but this is what I read in the newspapers. The other thing we need to talk about are the Baltic states. And you remember, if you got Poland as a square, sort of leading up to the Baltic from Poland, you saw the Baltic states: Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Now, these countries, they're small countries, they were grabbed by the Soviet Union. And after 1940, and after the war, after World War II, 1945 to 1991, they were part of the Soviet Union. But it's fair to say that they were enslaved by the Soviet Union. The vast majority of people there did not want to be part of the Soviet Union. They were seized by Stalin by military force and annexed into the Soviet Union. There was always a very strong anti-Russian component to their culture in that 45 years they were under Soviet domination. And as communism began to collapse in Europe, you remember we talked about the fall of the Berlin Wall in November of 1989, December, the uprising against the communist states of Eastern Europe. Well, it took a little bit longer inside the Soviet Union, but by the beginning of 1991, the Baltic states were in open revolt against Moscow. And they declared their independence. And Mikhail Gorbachev didn't do anything to stop them militarily. And that is what led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. The Baltic states wanted out. And when the Soviet army didn't go in to crush them, that let the other states declare their independence. And the Soviet Union collapsed in March of 1991. So for nearly 30 years, the Baltic states have been independent. The Baltic countries do not speak a Slavic language. They have a language more closely related to Finnish, I believe. But they have their own culture. Now, I should say, there is a very sizable Russian ethnic minority in all three of these countries. In Lithuania, I gather it's like 40% of the people there. It's a lot less in Estonia. You know, the northern, it goes in alphabetical order. North is Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. This was by deliberate Soviet policy. Stalin liked to uproot peoples and move them around to sort of divide and conquer. So he took Baltic peoples and moved them out of their homeland to other places in the Soviet Union, and he moved in Russians onto their lands. He did this to mix them up so they wouldn't be nationalist and want to break away from the Soviet Union. It just didn't. He didn't do it thoroughly enough, I guess. And when they got their chance in 1991, they took it. So there have been tensions, especially in Lithuania, between ethnic Lithuanians and the ethnic Russians who live within its borders. They are very concerned the Russians might try to dominate them again. So all three Baltic states joined NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that the United States is the most prominent member of. Remember, it's a military alliance. An attack on one is an attack on all. So at least in theory, if the Russians ever did move militarily against the Baltic states, the United States would go to war with them. There's been some question as to whether we would, in fact, go to what might be World War III or something if the Russians acted in Lithuania. But let's hope it never comes to that, because we are by treaty bound to defend them. And we do have troops there, not a lot, but a small number. I think there's an air base there. Poland is a member of NATO as well. The Poles have been under Russian domination more than they want, and they joined NATO as soon as they could. So all of these countries I've been talking about in this lecture are allies of the United States. In fact, the Poles are among the most loyal allies of the United States there are. When you look at Afghanistan, the countries that have sent their troops to fight alongside ours the longest are our very old allies, the British, our pretty old allies, the Germans, and the Poles. Those are a lot of the troops that have been helping American soldiers in Afghanistan. There's lots of Poles there. So these countries have sided with America against Russia, you might say. Economically, the Poles have come a ways. They've improved a lot since the bad old days of communism, but they still have a way to go. That's why so many Poles have immigrated elsewhere. Economic opportunities are better in Western Europe, and they tend to move there to pursue economic opportunities. In the European Union, there's freedom of movement, right? That's one of the reasons the British left. There was a sort of backlash, especially against Polish and Romanian immigrants in Britain, that led to the Brexit vote, at least in part. But anyway, the Baltic states, on the other hand, have been something of an economic miracle. They really have turned, especially in the internet, computer, IT technology. The Balts have been all over that. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, they have really become prosperous countries in the last 30 years because of that. So I think that's all for lecture number 3 in geography. Tune in for lecture 4.